Welcome to the Wisdom Check by Tabletop to Keyboard. This is going to be our bi-weekly podcast where we discuss things such as Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, I think maybe we need to turn up my mic a little bit, guys. How about some more gain?
This is the intro to end all intros. Talk about Dungeons, Dragons, and Geeks.
Now, I don't think that's proper. This is a family show after all. This is the intro we can use, fellas. It's good, clean fun for everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Check, where we have wholesome conversations about the dilemmas we face every day.
Nah, hold on a second. I got your intro right here. Yeah, that's better. Welcome to the Wisdom Check, where I'm right, just wrong. We're gonna have guests on to talk about it. It's gonna be awesome, because I said so.
He is right. He did say so. I don't know. Is surf music the best music for a podcast about D&D?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
This just in, nobody can agree on our intro for this podcast. So we're just going to start. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Roll for initiative. Fuck. A 1. It's like every time.
Live. Hey,
All right.
everyone, we are live. Hopefully.
I think we have made it. Looks like we are. We are live here today. Welcome to another episode of the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin, back once again. With me over there is Jeff. And
Hey.
situated here between us on the screen is Skuzz from his Twitch channel, Skuzznuggit. Go ahead and say hi to everybody, Skuzz.
Hello, everybody. Skuzznuggit here. Twitch.tv/Skuzznuggit and on Twitter, Skuzznuggit, and on Instagram, Skuzznuggit, I think. Yeah.
Man, what
Did a good job of nailing down all those platforms at once, right? That's important stuff.
Consistency is king.
I know. It's actually really, it always is like super awkward when you do have, I watch other Twitch streams and they're like, I'm this on Twitch and then I'm this, but with a underscore something something on Twitter, and then Instagram is something completely different, so don't worry about it.
I had that same problem in my online guild. We, a group of us officers got together and decided we needed a brand, so we went with Plague State because it was like available everywhere, so we picked that. So I understand this. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Nope, this is the Wisdom Check where we talk about tabletop role-playing games, and we have Skuzz here today because we wanted to have him on first off, and he wanted to talk a bit about some 5e modules, and we're going to get to that shortly. But like we like to do at the beginning, look, he's got the
Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
And that is a beast of one too. That's not your normal
It's
module.
thick.
It is thick.
Awesome.
But we'll get to it shortly. What we'd like to do with these Wisdom Check episodes is talk a little bit about your role-playing past here. So tell us a little bit about how you got started with D&D.
So, got started with D&D, I think now almost 6 years ago, with just basically like an office group, which is usually the case, where somebody kind of brought up like, hey, does anybody want to play D&D on the weekend? And we got together. One of our coworkers, she was the DM. We started in 3.5, actually. And interestingly, that is where my screen name and my gamer tag comes from.
Really?
Beforehand, I was going by some edgy ass screen name called Glockwork, and it was like, I was a big fan of Clockwork Orange, and so I was maybe it can be Clockwork, and then that was taken everywhere. And then I was like, well, I'll be Glockwork because that's cool, because guns. And I was like, that's super cool for, college edgy person. But turned out that we did this 3.5 D&D 3.5 adventure, and I made a half-orc bard named Skuzznuggit.
Beautiful.
And he was he used 2 maces as his drumsticks on his giant bongo war drum. And I think in 3.5, bards were actually pretty damn good because you could do your inspiring song and have that like maintained during battle. So I would just start up a fat beat on my drum and end up charging into battle and bashing people's skulls in. with my 2 mallets. It was quite fun. My wife was playing with me at the time too. She was keeping me in check because my intelligence score was absolute garbage, so I wasn't allowed to make any plans for any of our like attacks and things like that. So I was just the muscle, and it was quite good. So from there, we moved on, had a little bit of a hiatus, and then another person ended up getting us into 5th edition. And I love the fact that he did his own kind of custom campaign, a little bit of a homebrew thing. But I love the fact that it was so accessible. It was really easy to just jump into the class. Everything was a lot more intuitive, honestly, at that point. And it really got me into the whole 5th edition thing. And I was talking to you at the beginning of while we were off stream at the beginning in the intro section, that got me looking for more Twitch streams that would stream Dungeons and Dragon content. And that actually got me into, as I was mentioning, the It Me JP roleplay channel, where there was multiple D&D shows on there at that point. One of them was a West Marches style game, which was really cool to watch because it was like a ensemble cast that was constantly rotating out. There were still storylines that kind of went through, and you would have multiple episodes with the same people. And I kept following them, and they ended up doing like a more traditional campaign, and it got me interested in doing something similar with my buddies. And so I started my first DM stuff actually started with my wife and some friends from work, and actually in my work office doing one-shots at lunch. So it was really challenging, but it was taking pre-made stuff and trying to be able to run it in like 2 or 3 1-hour lunch sessions. I was using a lot of the Adventure League pre-written stuff because it's honestly, they're usually like a 3 to 4 hour one shot anyways. So ended up that those were pretty easy to run through and easy to do during lunches. And then started doing a West Marches style thing with like, a Heroes Guild type of stuff at home, doing home sessions with that. And finally found Roll20 and was able to realize that, this is a great way that I can start playing with my friends from like college and some other people that I had already been streaming at the time, other games, like things like Dark Souls and stuff like that. And I started to realize like Roll20 is a great, it's a great platform to be able to connect with your buddies from across the planet, wherever they want to be. So sure. Luckily for us, there was a bunch of us that were all in the West Coast, and we had like, 2 people up in Oregon or 2 people up in Washington, some other people in Northern California, and some people down here in LA. And we started doing, we kicked it off with Curse of Strahd, doing me having like I think I found I had the book. I did a lot of my own custom maps because I wasn't able to, at that time, it actually didn't have the module on Roll20.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And so that was the most work I've ever done. And it made me appreciate the value, in all honesty. And this is like my first pitch for the custom modules, or for the modules that you buy from Wizards of the Coast. If you're on Roll20 and you're using it, it is so much work saved. If you're thinking about it and you're like, you know what? I think I'm going to be playing this with some buddies who are, maybe remote or something like that. It is ridiculous amount of time saved. I spent so much time on prep for Curse of Strahd with me trying to find maps that fit what I was doing. I actually had to honestly, don't tell anybody, but illegally find the printed maps and try to find them, resize them correctly onto Roll20. I had to bring in all the stats of the tokens and things like that. Like it was more prep than an in-person game. It was definitely
by
as much
far
prep as an in-person game, or if not more. So but I still had a blast, and that was where we kicked off. And as I mentioned earlier, we went from finishing Curse of Strahd to jumping right into Tomb of Annihilation when that released on Roll20, and that opened my eyes into how much value there is for purchasing the Roll20 module, as I had no tokens to prep, all the maps there, dynamic lighting included. Wow, so worth it.
Yeah, the dynamics is great.
So good. And the fact that everything is there, you can import if you have even with SRD stuff, you can just drag in the SRD. That's like super good. And we had a blast with Tomb of Annihilation, jumped into Waterdeep Dragon Heist right after that. And now we're the group that I'm DMing, we're currently running with me DMing Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and then with one of our other players DMing Storm King's Thunder, which once again is a pre-purchased module on Roll20.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, because that is definitely something that is vastly different for the homebrew crowd. Like when we're building our game sessions as a homebrew, it's all custom maps. You have to make them all out, doing all your own NPCs and stuff. So like you said, just crazy amounts of prep. And I'm glad that Levi does it and not me. So that's a plus. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about the the ability to just pre-purchase the module through Roll20. I always just kind of assumed people were just taking the module itself and doing the legwork. But if it's already done for you, oh, wow. That is enormous. Really opens it up, allows you to really get in there and focus on the things that are important to you in the module. Your players.
That's what I was going to say, is the fact that because 300 hours, if not more, of prep work is already done for these modules, that is the chance for me to start to open it up for more customized content and literally using it as a playground for having, like, asking my players, what do you want to get out of this adventure? Like, what are your characters' ambitions and things like that? And then I can just go into it and start rolling with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and one of the things we were kind of talking about, and for people out there who maybe haven't found you yet, you do some of this stuff live on stream, your prep, which is, you're one of the rare people I see who do this. And I don't know how your players don't watch, but nonetheless, it's, I'd be tempted, but it is cool to see you go in there and you're putting the monster tokens in there where they need to be, figuring out how many you want, flipping through the indexes, pulling out all the different monsters, swapping things out. Like, you're still doing a lot of work. Like,
yeah, the work on for one thing, for Dungeon the Mad Mage and for Dragon House Waterdeep, there was a little bit of extra work that I had to do, mainly because as some people who ran it in person were not as interested in this, or not disinterested, but didn't really feel this as much. But there were some initial complaints about these two modules where the maps themselves were a little bit lackluster.
Oh, okay.
So they were I think it was Devin Root. No, not Devin Root. Devin Root's the Critical Role person. She makes amazing maps. It was somebody who makes, it's for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, they were the more traditional Dungeons and Dragons maps, like black and white, pretty bare bones, not a lot of stuff. And for people who had just come from playing Tomb of Annihilation on Roll20, those were like full colored maps, like beautiful maps that were really, really well done, full, like your typical what you expected at that time art for those things. And this might have been due to the fact that they put out two really pretty beefy adventures, like back to back next to each other, that they were like, well, we have to cut corners on something. And it might have just been the maps. I can like for Dragon Heist, you can kind of like see, I'll hold up the book in terms of like what the details of some of these maps are, because they're honestly, like, I was a little bit bummed out about them. So in a book setting like this,
oh yeah,
there you go. So like that,
that's super old school. Yeah,
like, it's going with the old school style. However, when you take that and you put that on Roll20, it ends up being like, because it's an entire computer screen of the map, and so the resolution is all whack, and it's like a little bit weird. So a lot of the prep time that I did on Waterdeep Dragon Heist and now Dungeon of the Mad Mage is using community generated maps, either colorized versions of the ones that were on Roll20, or where people have actually taken the time to go in with their own tabletop, like in virtual tabletops, and taking assets and making, like Dungeon of the Mad Mage. There's two people, I'll have to look up their names and give them shout outs, but I've been using their maps. One of them is like Delita and the other one is Clawless. They're part of there's multiple discords for these things. And they've taken the time to actually make full size, high res maps with their own stuff. And so that's a lot of the prep I do, is just trying to size those correctly to, I think you were watching that. Dustin.
It messes with my OCD to watch the little shadow lines not line up, and then slowly edging them to try to get them all to match up across the whole map. Like that part kills me. I have to like look away for a bit.
Oh, I totally understand. Even for me, I'm just like fucking frustrated. And Dungeon of the Mad Mage has 23 levels.
Oh
plus
my god.
23 levels, so that's 23 maps plus 3 maps of Skullport. It's ridiculous. It's I've only adjusted up to, I think, level 10. and that's it. And my players just finished level 3, so there you go.
Well, the plus is that you can be pretty confident your players are actually going to go to those maps. Right?
Yeah, you're not putting a lot of time in the maps they'll never see. That's for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, I know Dustin had a lot of experience doing that with his game. Putting together the maps, trying to guess where the players are going to go and all that.
Yeah.
I actually haven't done much of that. I saw the work that was going to be necessary for that in my Exalted game, and I went, nope. We're just going with pretty pictures.
When I did Raining Bullets, it was an urban game. So what's even harder with Roll20 with an urban game is there's not a lot of urban content in Roll20 to use. So it was a lot of figuring out how to make the pieces they had available work to make city like terrain.
Are you talking like modern urban or like water deep urban?
Like modern urban. Like
Ooh,
D20 modern.
Yeah.
Like there's not a lot out there. So I had to do a lot of, and stuff's under weird things when you search. Like I would search for one thing and find something else that was cool, and I'd have to like log it. Like this is where I found this, like so that I could find it later when I decided I needed. It was an interesting chore to try to get all that stuff to work out. Like it looked good in the end. Like when it was done, I think all my maps looked good, but it was definitely a painstaking process. And I was also fortunate that I guess in a way that I didn't use like the fog of war and the line of sight stuff, so I didn't have to try to match that stuff up. So.
Yeah, the dynamic lighting stuff is brilliant for your players on Roll20 because it adds a really kind of cool layer of like setting surprises and things like that when people like look around a corner and all of a sudden they're like, oh, monsters. And you're like, yeah, that's right. There's like 10 monsters in that room around the corner. Now, you didn't know. But at the same time, it is a pain in the butt to set up sometimes. And I will hate to admit it, like as much as I love Roll20, there is still a lot of optimization that they could be doing in terms of their. I mean, if you run Roll20 on Chrome, like better hope that you got enough RAM to feed that bad boy, because it's gonna like Roll20 with dynamic lighting and fog of war, or like dynamic fog of war or whatever it is, the one that like remembers where
reveals and it goes away. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ! There's some of our players that like. They'll be just like, I can't, the map's not loading for me. And that's actually especially challenging on Dungeon of the Mad Mage, where these maps are, every single map gives you a warning when you save it on Roll20, because it's just like, this map is too big. Your players may not be able to like enjoy this. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. What am I going to do?
They're huge levels. I mean, that dungeon is set to take you from level 5 to 20. That's how much content there is in that one module. It takes you from level 5 all the way to level 20.
So
it's intense.
That's a lot of dungeon crawl, I guess. At that point, is it actually more of a story, or is it more of a pure dungeon crawl?
So that is where, like, to jump into the whole like customizing the content.
Segue, nailed it.
Yeah, that's where I am taking a little bit of a different approach to like Dungeon of the Mad Mage. It sets the stage for a very, very unique and interesting dungeon experience. Each level has its own story. There is an overarching story. If you read through, you can see that the overarching story is all about Hallister and how he is just using this like his 23 levels of his dungeon as this kind of experimental place where he is the lord of it, almost acting as a Strahd as a character for the dungeon for the entirety. He controls it. He could, if you want to, you can make him appear at any point in time in front of the party and finger of death them, just for fun. But the part that I am actually changing a lot here, and the reason that I'd like to use it as almost like the kind of set piece for my group, is they have come into it directly from Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And so all of the characters, all the PCs had stories, had things that they had actually learned through Waterdeep Dragon Heist, had their own personal goals that I had added in Waterdeep Dragon Heist that they personally wanted to transition into Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So we're currently making that work. We're changing some things up. We're making it a little bit more story oriented.
That's good.
Technically, the way that Dungeon of the Mad Mage is supposed to work is, in order to level up, you need to dungeon crawl. You need to clear a level of all the hostile mobs.
Wow.
And so that's what it's saying. Like, it obviously, there's always those prefaces at the beginning of these adventures, of the published adventures, that say like, this is just and this is I would say this is what I would preach to anybody who wants to run these adventures. Read that first intro paragraph, because Chris Perkins will say, this is meant as an outline for you. It is a bunch of ideas that you are welcome to use. By no means are you beholden to the words in this book. Like, use it to however you want. And I think that is when, like, for example, when Chris was doing the Waffle Crew, that series, it was running modules. Like, they did Tomb of Annihilation. But he was the perfect example of a DM who could take, I mean, it was his own work, so he knew it like
it helps.
the back of his hand. Sure, yeah. That definitely helps.
It was basically a homebrew game for him.
Yeah, but it was that perfect example of what I strive to do, which is to take a setting that is fully fleshed out and has all the lore there for you, so that you don't have to like struggle when a player asks you about something in the city, or when a player asks you about something of like, what would this character want to do? The answers are there for you. They're written for you, but you're as the DM get to kind of let them play, let them do whatever they want. In like back in Tomb of Annihilation, we had an entire divergence where I set up an entire civil war in Port Nyanzaru, because like there was the merchant princes of Nyanzaru, and there is a little thread in the story where there is somebody who, one of the merchant princes, sends you to go and assassinate the son of one of the other merchant princes. And so it was this moment for us to like, okay, well, what if that story went a little bit further? So like the characters discovered that there was this deeper assassination plot for, assassinating Jago, the son, the kind of flippant gladiator son of one of the merchant princes. So we had this entire like street warfare thing in Nyanzaru of nice. Battling it out and having half of the merchant princes on one side where they were trying to, one of them was the instigator of it was one of the merchant princes who came up from the poor. So she was trying to, like, no longer are we going to have the rich rule Nyanzaru. I'm going to like leave it to the folks who have the have-nots. Mm-hmm. But she unfortunately also was, making deals with demons and devils and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
as you do. It happens.
So we spent an entire, I think it was
standard politics.
Standard politics. So there's an entire 10 session arc where we forgot all about trying to find the Tomb of Annihilation and trying to end the death curse, and ended up having this part where we just had this insane Port Nyanzaru civil war where like one side called in the pirates to assault the bay, and one of our players, this dragonborn, got to surf on the dragon turtle to go and like assault the ships. Like he was out in the harbor on the dragon turtle, like fending off the pirate ships and destroying them. And afterwards they were like, that was super cool. But the thing was, all of that was laid out in the book. I did homebrew, the story and some of the plot, and maybe added in a few extra monsters here and there. But the underlying like political turbulence and all of these kind of the assassination attempts and all these things, that existed. That exists in the story. And so that was one of those instances where they give you the seeds to really expand out and let like interesting stories blossom within these modules. The number one thing that people get tied up with in these pre-written ones is that they're like, wait, no, that's not written in there. Like,
right.
What am I supposed to do?
Right.
Like, no, you can't do that because it's not written in the book.
The box text is all that matters, right? The box text. Stick to the box text.
So you mentioned that. So that's something that's interesting. Like, what is I question for you two? You're both very much in the homebrew stuff. What has prevented your group or you guys from taking on some of these pre-written and like Wizards of the Coast published adventures?
You want to start, Jeff? I'll fill in when you're done.
Sure. Well, I'm considering doing it, but I think creativity has been kind of a big thing for us, and again, like we were describing, there is creativity in these pre-built ones, but the world building as a whole is a really fascinating component of running your own game, and I think not having guardrails is nice. So like if your players want to go completely away from the mission, that's fine. You can improvise. Your story's going to keep going. You could find different ways to do it. But whereas a module, like you're saying, there's, at least in the old school modules, it was very clear, this is what you're doing. There's no other information available. You have to be this level when you get to this point. If your players did X, Y, or Z, well, the mission's kind of borked. And so I think that put us off. Like, we came on, I came in a red box, some of these guys came in second ed. And in those days, it was a very different climate, I think, for modules. I mean, it was the heyday of modules, really. But I think nowadays, they're approaching it very differently from what you're describing. I think we're just the type of people that get into a groove and then we just don't break out of it very often.
No, that's absolutely fine. And I totally feel exactly what you're saying. When I transitioned from running Curse of Strahd into running Tomb of Annihilation, it was almost like night and day for our group in terms of what the pre-written adventure offered. Curse of Strahd was...
Ooh, we just got raided.
Role play to begin with. Yeah, we have a raid from Laugh Lindy coming in, so welcome raiders.
Oh, yeah, thanks, Laugh Lindy. Much appreciated.
Thank you,
14 of you guys.
So like Curse of Strahd is exactly what you were saying. As written, it's very on rails. Mm-hmm. It's like you're given a map of Barovia, but like there's no reason for you to go and explore these fuck off woods over there, or like go up and check out this mountain. Like that one definitely I had to do had to just basically do a lot of strange instigation and stuff like that for to make things a little bit more interesting there, because the only way that game or that module kind of makes itself replayable and customized is there's like a Tarot card reading at the beginning of the game. And if you know what that is basically you could play the module over and over again, and based off of what cards you draw from this tarot deck, that depicts on who your ally is going to be in the final fight.
Huh.
And where the 3 items that you're searching for are going to be hidden. But
is it known to the players, or is that just something you draw and then it changes the story?
It's when they go through. I've watched several people do Curse of Strahd, and those things are not known. Like you get a card, and I don't even think the players really know the importance of the card at the time they're getting it. I've seen it done a few different ways, but
yeah, it's at like rules as written in the module. It's like you go to this kind of like gypsy camp, which are the gypsies. I forget what they're called.
Romani.
They're the Romani / they're basically the eyes and ears of Strahd. They're the allies of Strahd without being inherently like evil vampire spawn. Because I remember why it's actually a kind of a cool little thing. They're allowed to live within Barovia untouched because when Strahd was a child, he was saved by a troop of these Romani, of these gypsies. Yeah. And so he's given them kind of like free passage. They're the only ones who are allowed to enter and exit the demi-plane of Barovia. So
yeah, I think I remember that from the old novels. Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
So yeah, and so that like one of the first things that you do is you go to this camp, and this like old soothsayer prophet lady gives the tarot card reading. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's like, no, they don't. You don't know exactly. You just are given these cards, and you just have to kind of like figure it out as you go along. It's pretty interesting.
Dustin, did you have any opinions on why we don't do modules?
Yeah. Well, I think for us, has a lot to do with when we started gaming. For a lot of us, we started gaming back in like high school, and this thing called expendable cash was not something we had a lot of.
Yeah.
So we were lucky if one of the group had like the player's handbook and the monster's manual and a DMG. That was about what we had. And so kind of maybe almost out of necessity, we didn't have the modules. So what did we do from day one? We made our own worlds and our own campaigns. And I guess once we started doing that, we just never looked back. It was.
Yeah, we also didn't have access to gaming stores.
Like some of the stuff we're talking about with how you can customize these modules, I think modules back in second ed were a little more, there was a lot less, I guess, room for interpretation on them. They were very much roller coasters on rails. So more so than what these seem to be nowadays with fifth ed.
I mean, some of the most famous modules from those editions were your typical dungeon crawls, right? Like they brought them back recently for the Tales from the Yawning Portal with like White Plume Mountain and like Dead in the Fae. All those, like they're they're currently. I mean, even one of the kind of recent ones, what's it called? Ghost of Saltmarsh,
Right.
which was
The
which
Pathfinder
is
one,
another one. Which is it's a compilation. Like even now, Wizards of the Coast is taking what were these kind of like individual little like one-off modules, and they tried to make this one into more of a like 6-part story type of thing. So I totally get that, and I feel like you're right. There's a lot of kind of the folks that were into that old school or like second ed D&D, where it's just where they started, and I think that's probably like some of the most, like, obviously Critical Role, most well-known D&D stream out there right now, and with all those personalities. And I've heard Matt Mercer talk over and over again about like where they started as well, and it was with like second ed or advanced like AD&D, and it's exactly what you said. Like, you maybe had access to the SRD or whatever it was back then, and the best thing to do was, well, if you don't want to spend the money on the individual adventures, you make your own. And that is kind of where I think Matt Mercer has gotten his chops, and why he creates the crazy worlds of Critical Role, and where he's able to really make homebrew shine as well.
Yeah, necessity is a mother.
That's exactly the case. I think it's interesting too. Like, I think modules back then were more of like a set of challenges. It was like I kind of describe it as like climbing Everest. Like you didn't, when you went into those modules, you went into them because you wanted to see if you could survive it. It wasn't a matter of like, what story am I telling? It's, can you literally get your characters as a party through this? It's almost like we kind of talk a little bit about MMOs. It's almost like trying to do your mythic level rating on an MMO, right? Like you're trying to play it at the highest level, and you're trying to see if you just succeed at this thing in general, and more than what happened to my character story wise, like as he goes through this thing.
Do you guys think that that even with like modules, the way D&D has started to change recently, do you think it's taken a turn more towards like storytelling and role playing?
100%.
I think the public perception is. Yeah. I don't know that all groups are doing that. Like, I think that's been kind of termed the Matt Mercer effect with professional DMs and, whatever. But I think there's always been different types of gamers. We talked about this in past episodes, where I think there are some people that come into the hobby for acting and for, storytelling. And I think there are some that come into it from the wargaming kind of perspective of more of a, kick in the doors and fight the monsters and survive.
Yeah.
And I think, in terms of probably the original audience, I think the old school crowd was much more of the X's and O's, beat 'em up kind of types. And I think being optimal for a situation and stuff like that as well. Yeah. And I think, the old school games kind of reflected a more brutal world where you weren't going to keep a character for very long. And so the idea of putting a lot of energy into a character concept just really wasn't there.
Yeah, it's like, what's my backstory? I don't know. I'm a barbarian. I like to hit things.
Sword guy.
Kicks down door. Let's go.
Yeah.
Sword guy, sword. There you go.
And I think... go ahead.
Yeah, I think what you have is... I think you have a scenario where... I think there's... The X's and O's people are out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that they're not in like a small number. I think the boom with 5e brought in a large number of role players. And we talked a little bit about this last week, about just... how 5th ed kind of is fantastic for some things, but like if you're a mechanics person, 5th ed maybe isn't for you. It's not the most mechanically in-depth version of D&D you can possibly play. So I feel like a lot of your X's and O's people are probably still hanging out in the Pathfinder world. Mm-hmm. But I think that just in general, your role play people are your faces for what D&D is.
Yeah,
they're the movers and shakers. They're your spokespeople. Whether it's Matt Mercer, Satine Phoenix, those people. Those are people those are the people who are going to stream.
Yeah,
Your X's and O's people are probably not your streamers. Like your role play people are your streamers, because that's the easiest way to put that out there and to let people connect with it. You don't see a lot of X's and O's streams, I guess. Like that's why I always get encouraged when I see people who do both really well. And that's one of the things, because I agree, like when I watch, like you do both, I think really well. Like you handle the tactical part of it and the role play part both. And that's rare.
Our group is split. And that's actually part of the kind of, when we start modules, most of them know what the module is. Not like, know the entire story of the module. But we'll have that session 0 where we'll talk about, okay, we're going to be running, Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It is a city, very vast city. You're in Waterdeep. It's not like we loved Waterdeep Dragon Heist. If any of you out there watching, I think Waterdeep Dragon Heist is an excellent module to either purchase or to look into. Tomb of Annihilation, it's cool, but if it is it's pretty brutal. I had to actually change a lot of stuff in order to the tomb itself, whatever. The players at that point, they were fine. We actually, I'll talk about this for a later part about how I changed up the experience for Tomb of Annihilation, because otherwise it just didn't make sense.
We hadn't said it, but I guess we should say there's probably some spoilers if you're wanting to go into
I
think at this point we've talked a little about them, so hopefully people aren't, having anything ruined in these stories. So
no, I won't spoil anything for the major parts of this, but for Dragon Heist, major Waterdeep, open sandbox. It is the city of Waterdeep, and the players feasibly can go anywhere. They can find a bar around any corner. They can go to any of the districts, and that is actually what made it really, really cool. They're like, oh, we want to find out what's in the City of the Dead, the kind of giant Central Park-esque mausoleum-filled graveyard of Waterdeep, and ended up that they found a trap house drug den there, because I was like, well, that would be a great place, because the lore of that area, they kind of, once again, they give you this in a little bit of the backstory of Volo's echelon to Waterdeep. They're like, oh yeah, City of the Dead. It is these giant mausoleums owned by the rich families of Waterdeep that are actually pocket dimensions. So they look like, a 10 by 10 mausoleum, but you crank open that stone door and you walk through it, and suddenly you're in a 40 by 40 giant spacious thing. And so we had fun with that. We made it so they chased down some local street gang there and found their drug hideout where they were using an old abandoned mausoleum to make what was some strange ass drug that they just happened to get their hands on.
So you don't feel at all restricted by the
Hell
content
no.
that exists and then the actual
you can see
adventure.
when he does his prep, he just blows the roof right off the thing. It's his own playground. He moves monsters around, puts in custom monsters, whatever he wants to.
It's interesting because I feel like there's a pressure, maybe it's just in my head, but of people who know the modules, or who particularly on a stream come to watch a module, of wanting to see it as its pure form. Do you run into any opposition on that?
No.
Good.
I think that I think that the thing is I would the way that we ran Dragon Heist, for example, was the thread of the main story remained true to the book. I didn't change any of that. If not very, very little of that I changed. Mm-hmm. We stuck to that. However, there is ample space in there to make this what would be a tiny one stick tree into this giant flourishing fully flourished tree, where you could have it allows for ample opportunity to be able to all of a sudden be all right, well, here's some downtime where they're trying to establish themselves as owners of this new inn, this new tavern in this alleyway that they just inherited. What are they going to do? Well, you know what? Let's introduce them to the factions of the city. They can go out and do these side missions, throw in an additional thing. The other beautiful thing is if those out there that have seen it, go and check out the DM's Guild. Whenever there's a new module released, the DM's Guild goes wild. And talk about homebrew stuff. They for instance, I purchased this off the DM's Guild. Dungeon of the Mad Mage Companion, Skullport. Because in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, there is Skullport, is the underground smuggler's city. However, it's pretty brief in the book. It's given some flavor, but this gives an entire, what could almost be a 4 or 5 session, thing for your group to be doing, to actually bring Skullport back to its former glory, restore the power of the flame skulls that once lived there, and and expel the Xanathar guild that is currently inhabiting it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so there's a bunch of people out there that are kind of taking that same approach, where they're okay, it's sandboxy. Take what you need to do, start to play with it, go nuts with it. So yeah, with Waterdeep, we allowed, I spoke with each player, figured out what their motives were. for example, we had my wife was playing a Shader Kai Grave Cleric. So her whole thing was to bring back strong emotions and interesting things to the Raven Queen. So we had these, like, we got to have these vignettes of her returning, like when they would level up. A lot of the time she would return to the Shadowfell through, like, you know, just a random portal that she could generate in the basement of their tavern and start to, like, you know, get more information or like learn things about people out there in Waterdeep. And she was more in tune with like gathering emotions, added in custom items that were like for each of the characters because it makes it more fun when they get to have fun things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we had one of our monks was a turtle monk or whatever you want to call it.
Ninja Turtle?
Boogie.
Yeah. Well, Boogie, exactly.
Boogie is a fun character.
Yeah.
So it also helps that our group is basically split, I would say 50-50 between people who are just like really into their characters and want to role play, and then we do have those people who are like, I want to hit things hard and make things go boom.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to, and I talk to them, and we get to have, and usually I'll try to split sessions with either, sometimes it's all role play, sometimes it's going to be a big fight, so it's going to be heavy combat, but at the same time we build it together. And I think that's the other thing too, is that these modules they're really fun to just play with a group that is comfortable with each other and then can build together. I can see how there would be groups where if you run a module with like a group that just like you come together on Roll20, you come together in whatever setting you're in, and they're just like, oh yeah, we're running Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And they just blow through and they're just like, buy the book, finish it.
Mm-hmm.
We finished Waterdeep Dragon Heist in 72 sessions.
Wow.
I believe so. Yeah, so 72 sessions, and that's running 72 3-hour sessions.
Man.
We were talking we were on our Discord, the Waterdeep Dragon Heist Discord, and talking about like, well, how long did everybody take to do this? And one guy came forward and he's like, oh yeah, we finished it in 8 sessions. And I was just like, what?
Yeah, there's no roleplay in that game. There's no way.
So, but it just shows that these modules, they can be as elaborate as you want them to be, but then at the same time they can be, you know, you could just run it rules as written, as you said, Dustin, read the box text. Just do it. And then box text. Somebody will just be like, all right, where's my next thing? Let me roll an investigation check. Oh, cool, it's down the street. Let's go. And then you just fucking do it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think modules have a couple different things they can do. I mean, for one thing, they're prepackaged, easy to run. Not necessarily easy, because there is definitely a skill set and a talent to making a module run well. But if you're brand new to DMing, it's probably a lot easier to take a pre-generated story that's already balanced and learn from that what you would do differently or what you would take for your own game. And so, like, I think it's a strong benefit now that there's so many of these. And I also think that, you know, with all these module communities that you're talking about, you don't really get that with homebrew because it's one person's work unless they're collaborating across some kind of network. But with, you know, these pre-generated modules, obviously there are communities sharing ideas and that kind of stuff. And that's really cool. That would be something I'd be interested in checking out. Like, not to railroad on the conversation here, but I actually picked up the Pathfinder 2e book and the module for that. And so I'm thinking about running that. That would be the first time I've run a module before. And our group typically doesn't do it. We're a little bit module averse. But for the reason why I'm thinking about doing it is because I think it sets the tone of what the game wants to be initially. Just to say, like, here's the things that you're supposed to highlight. Here's the weirdness of the systems or whatever. And then from there, decide if we want to keep doing it or do a homebrew thing.
Yeah. And when you speak about those communities, like right now I'm looking at Discord, I'm a part of currently like 3 different communities. There is the Tomb of Annihilation Dungeon Masters. There's the Dungeon of the Mad Mage Dungeon Masters. There's the Welcome to like Waterdeep Dragon Heist Dungeon Masters. And if you look and see, like, there is, like, I look in the other servers tab, there are Curse of Strahd, Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus, which is coming out soon, Ghost of Saltmarsh. Every single one of these things ends up having its own server, which is really cool. And as you kind of mentioned, it's really, really good for bouncing ideas up. Like, you go into the server and there'll be constant conversation. There's always, like, you know, channels and stuff that'll be like monster help, quest help, like things like that. So people are constantly riffing off of each other where they're like, hey man, I don't think that this encounter is actually that good. What did you guys do for this thing? My players, like, I'm worried that my players are not going to like it. And so we bounce ideas off of each other, and we'll be like, oh, I ran it this way and they loved it. They were more like heavily into combat. And that's how we ended up doing. They're like, oh, my players didn't even go into combat. I allowed them to talk to the big bad, or like talk to this person, and they worked it out with a bunch of persuasion checks or intimidation checks, and that's how we ended up getting out of it. And none of that's written in the module, but you riff it off of each other, and it's really cool.
So let's get into the kind of specifics here a little bit. So when you're putting together a module, you're saying you're doing it on stream. So I'm assuming you're customizing it to your party, not to your party, your players. And so what does that process look like? Like what are you doing specifically to tailor a pre-generated module to them?
So I'll go back to like Tomb of Annihilation, and this is where I'll bring in this thing that I mentioned this earlier before the stream, that I follow closely one of the DMs, Adam Coble, writer of Dungeon World, he's actually the in-house DM for Roll20.
Nice.
So he put together this thing for the group that they're running right now. It's called the stream, or the campaign is called Court of Swords, and they're doing this thing called they changed up the experience thing, because there's always these debates like, do you do combat-based experience where you get your, it's just kill monster, soak up experience, level up, or there's always the milestone base, which a lot of people like to do, which is kind of what I'm actually now doing for Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which is, like you make your way through a level, whatever, you completed it, level up, it's fine. Like I'm happy with doing that, and I know my players well enough that I know they're not going to just be like, I beeline my way to the next level so I can level up really quick. I'm like, no, you're like, I'll put shit in your way, dudes. Like, chill out. Like I'll make shit happen for that'll be tough for you.
They do a pretty good job of exploring on their own.
They do, and so back to the Tomb of Annihilation thing. What we ended up putting is this thing called goal-based experience. So every character had 3 slots that they were allowed to put goals in. Okay. And this was super, super useful. And this is based off of Adam Coble's way that he's running, as I said, the Court of Swords thing. What you would do is, at the end of every session, each player would tell you what goals they want to complete for the next session. And I would assign difficulty to those goals. So they could be anywhere from a typical encounter difficulty, right? So you say deadly, hard, medium, easy. So they have 3 slots that they can fill. And these goals can be anything. They can be, I'd like to deal 100 damage to a single monster in combat. They can be, I want to learn more about NPC X in the next session. Or it could be, I want to help player character X in the next session achieve this goal. It can be as simple also as like, I'd love to escape this area. Like, simple kind of like goal like that. So you assign them difficulties. The way that it kind of works is you look at the, wonderful, wonderful tool, Kobold Fight Club, on the internet, koboldfightclub.com, and you look at that character. You bring up like, say like the characters are all level 7. You go up and you bring up like, what is the experience for a deadly encounter, hard encounter, medium encounter, easy encounter for one level 7 character. If they complete that goal, they get the experience for that.
It's a cool idea.
If they work towards that goal, they get 50 times their player level of experience.
Gotcha.
So it's an interesting thing because it allows you, not only does it allow the players to kind of, in these modules or whatever they are, Tomb of Annihilation, perfect for this. It allows them to tell me as the DM what they're interested in.
Exactly.
Which is really, really cool. And that's actually, super good feedback loop. So I can know to prep for my next session that these players, their goal is, I'd love to learn more about the backstory of NPC X. So I get to write that. I'll write that backstory because their goal or their drive is to get more XP. Therefore, interview and interrogate this NPC.
Right.
Or if 50% of the group is like, I'd love to do a combat oriented goal. Great. Let's throw some combat at them for the next few sessions.
Mm-hmm.
That resonated very well with my group. They really, really liked it. I wrote up a whole document and things for it to kind of clarify it. It breaks down a little bit after level 11. Because if you guys look, I don't know if you guys have looked at the 5e EXP curve.
No.
I mean, every year's XP, so I have no clue what the numbers are.
Bruh, it's busted at so basically I started noticing, I was like, wait, okay, they're kind of like, they're getting through it. They're like, decent pace. Like it was like 2 or 3, like granted, as you guys already know, like I do 2 sessions a week. We were doing 2 sessions a week of Tomb of Annihilation. And they were like leveling up maybe like every 4 sessions, which actually is a pretty, that's a decent clip. It's not too fast. It's not too slow. I mean, that's like 16 hours of play. That's fine. But then I started to notice that it actually started to decrease once we passed level 11. So that took me into looking into the XP curve for 5th edition. And it has this weird thing where the whatever you want to call it, the gap to next level, like the EXP required between levels, once you get to level 10, just drops. Like it drops down to I think like half of what it was previously.
Really?
For a brief moment. And then I looked it up. I looked into it because I was like, what the hell? This must be an error. Like, what the hell were the 5e designers doing? Like, this is the coast, please. It turns out that it was intentional. It was done to playtesting. In most playtests, the designers and folks realized that most campaigns ended at level 10. That there was this whole thing where they get to level 10 and then either it just kind of like, they're like, oh God, the next level is so far away. Like, we're never going to, start to level up from here. What do we do? That ended up that they're like, oh, why don't we just let that next boost get from I think it's either from 11 to 12 or 10 to 11. That little jump there, letting them get that next level really quick, apparently was enough
little carrot.
Like a carrot that they were like, oh shit, I'm level 11. Oh, let's get going. And I think there's a lot of big class bumps at that
features,
point. Yeah, so they're just like, oh, cool, I get the next big cool thing. Let me stick with this character. And so their goal was to drive people into higher level content.
Yeah, because I think that's where you get your second class feature or third class feature. I think for your archetypes, things like that. I think that's when they come rolling in.
Exactly.
That's an interesting bit of reverse psychology, I guess. Looking at the player trends and being like, how are we going to buck that trend and try to let people get to higher level gameplay, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting because I think, a lot of the convention play has been, your characters make it to level 12 and they're retired, so maybe it's a tradition that's kind of become a thing within the gaming community to just peter out at that point.
I mean, there's really, when you look at the modules, since we're talking a lot about modules, a lot of your modules don't take you past that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Curse of Strahd drops you off at 10, I think, roughly. Waterdeep can drop you off even earlier than that, I think.
Waterdeep Dragon Heist ends at 5. You exit Waterdeep Dragon Heist at 5. Curse of Strahd, you're right, 10. Tomb of Annihilation, technically you're supposed to enter the tomb at 11, but that's horseshit, and you'd fucking die terribly. And that's that module. That's where that module is. It's great for that initial. It's such a good sandbox, but holy shit, if you do it by the book, it is brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah.
You enter the tomb at 11. Those characters are not living. You better have backups ready to somehow come out of the fucking walls in the tomb, because one, you are literally stuck in there. It is designed to
leave.
You can't leave. It's magically sealed, and it's just might as well. Guess I'll die for half of the stuff in there. I definitely had to do a lot of things where there's a lot of whatever you the term save or suck on a lot of spells and traps in there, where I'm just this is what? No, this isn't going to be fun. Right. I think that's the number one thing that I end up doing for a lot of these modules in terms of using them as the baseline sandbox is I look at a section, I read through it, and I'm like, is this fun?
Mm-hmm.
No. okay, let's figure out what makes it fun for my players. Maybe sometimes you would have players that are like hardcore and they're just like, yeah, I want to fucking bash my head against a brick wall until we break through it. And I'm like, I want that experience. Then like, hell yeah, let's go hardcore. Or you have players that are just like, I have a story for my character and I'd like to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
You're just like, okay, so let's work together to figure out how we can make this exciting, where it's not that you're just Superman like punching through every single mob, or like One Punch Man like wrecking everything in front of you. That there's still some risk and there's some struggle for your character, and it gets scary in the end. But like at the end of Tomb of Annihilation, we only had one character in the entire campaign die. And that was because that player wanted to retire that character and spoke to me about it. And he said, I'm not feeling this character anymore. I'd love to have a character that, has more, is a little bit more dynamic. He was playing a barbarian. He's playing like which one from the new Xanathars? The one that's like the elemental barbarian that like they can either be like storm, storm, sand, fire. Mm-hmm. And he was just like, I'm a Goliath? I'm a Goliath barbarian, and I literally my whole thing is I hit things hard.
Yeah,
I don't really have. I made a backstory about being part of like some pirates that are part of Chult in this like tropical area, but they're pirates and they live on an island that's like super far away, and I don't really have much here. Also, I just found out that there's other pirates in the campaign that are not my pirates, and so I'm kind of seen as a weird So he was just like, I'm not feeling it. Can we have a good exit? And so I worked with him. We ended up having like a nice dramatic exit for him.
That's great.
That didn't feel contrived and didn't feel like it felt true to his character, like chasing down a rogue element and like going beyond his limits and finally like, and going out in throes of battle.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then he brought in another character and he almost died as well because he stuck his head in a sphere of annihilation.
You're going to good places when there's a sphere of annihilation that shows up.
Yeah. It is. Tomb of Annihilation is, I think, by far the most dungeon crawlish of the modules that I've seen run.
Yeah, this is what scares me. My girlfriend is relatively new to Dungeons and Dragons, and she was like really into dinosaurs. She's a paleontologist, and she was
cool.
She's like, hey, I want to run a game. I want you to run a game so I can see dinosaurs, and this is the one I found. And has the book in her hand, is like, learn this and run it for me. And I'm like, ooh.
Could be worse.
You sure? Like, I could just put dinosaurs in a game.
So that's the thing, is like Tomb of Annihilation up to the tomb is like, oh, dinosaurs, jungle, like Indiana Jones. And then you go into the tomb and you're just like, ah! Like, everything's on fire and we're poisoned and it sucks. And oh my God. Yeah, you definitely need a lot of modifications for that tomb, for the actual like end game tomb. It's also really weird because as a module, it sets you off with this whole like hex grid kind of like travel thing for like the first like literally like I don't know like 5/8 of the book. Wow. And it's like you hex travel for like this giant map, and then and everything is like every hex is a day of travel, so it has this whole kind of like imminency of like, oh, this horrible curse, this death curse is going to end in X amount time, like these folks that you care about, they're going to die, oh no. And so that's like it's just like it has this thing where you're like, oh man, it takes us so long to get to these places, we need to figure out how to get there quicker. And then you finally get to the tomb, and then it literally like zooms in, like you arrive in the city where the tomb is, and everything is just like, all right, now it's literally like couple hours travel to get across the city that you're in. Okay, now you're in the tomb, and it's time just doesn't matter anymore. So it has this like everything just kind of goes like and funnels into that last little point. It's pretty interesting, actually.
Well, there's different styles, of course. Different pacings. Like we don't really do a lot of that hex crawling exploration phase. Like we definitely do exploration in terms of like looking through an environment, seeing what's there, interacting with NPCs and that kind of stuff. But our group pretty much just skips the overland travel stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we
just kind of like montaged away.
Yeah. Well, we play once or twice a month. It's hard to get together. We basically get 5-hour session, and that we're done for the month. So
Do you guys do in person, or are you on Roll20?
Roll20. Yeah, we used to do it in person, but
we have a couple of in-person games a year. We got one coming up in October. So we're pretty excited for that.
That's always super cool. We want to do that. By the like, we'd love to do that as well with our group. Like, we're all West Coast, so it's not like terribly difficult to get it arranged. Mm-hmm. We have enough space here in our apartment that we could probably like throw some people on the ground and have them fall asleep in this room that we're in now, and just like do the D&D session in our living room. But like in-person stuff is super cool.
Yeah,
I'm always jealous of the people who still get to play in person.
It has this, like, I would still, even if we play in person, I love Roll20 so much that like I would still bring it up on a TV screen somewhere just to have the interactability of seeing stuff on a map. Mm-hmm. I love, like, do you guys do, so you're all Roll20, but when you guys do in-person stuff, are you guys doing like mini things, like physical
minis,
maps and stuff
battle
like
maps, structures, Our DM got really elaborate last time, built ships and all kinds of stuff. It was pretty awesome.
Models, the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Helps that he's an artist, so it goes a long way.
All the time.
Damn.
Yeah, that's
super cool.
Man, the in-person is great.
None of us were expecting that. Like, for all of our years before we streamed, whenever we would play in person, it was like one rolled out battle map and a set of markers. It's like, all right, the orange is at this and the green is that. And you're like, all right, fine. Like, put your minis on the map. We ran around, killed stuff. Right?
What's the Coke can again? Oh, right. That's
exactly.
Yeah.
The Coke can is the wizard tower, Jeff. Get with the program.
Yep. The player's guide was the castle wall. There's a different energy at those live games, though. We talk a lot about being able to do crosstalk and kind of interaction. Characters interacting with each other while another character's doing something. You can't really do that effectively on Roll20 or online because you're just worried about stepping on each other conversationally. So I miss that a lot. But it is interesting because, like you said, if we had the Roll20 there in the live game, then the roles become simplified. You just click a button, it happens.
Yeah.
But then you're missing out on the opportunity to roll dice.
My group, every time that we've done it in person, I have another session this Friday for a group in my office of brand new people that like wanted to get into D&D. So I started them at like level 3 because fucking starting at level 1 is boring as shit. You're not going to be entertained.
Preach.
So yeah. So, I mean, this is one where like, I don't run just pure modules. Like I actually did homebrew I love homebrewing one shots. I think that's easy. That's an easier thing for me to do in terms of the amount of time I put into it and stuff like that. Like I just homebrewed a very simple, like backstory one shot of like certain, like, literally stealing from most of comic book fiction of it being similar to Hellboy, where it's like they roll up in a garbage truck and they're actually like, they show up as the insurance fraud inspectors, but they're really, arcane anomaly, like folk.
Nice.
So this group, so did a quick one-shot thing of figuring out like, what happened in this inn where like this like soup kitchen where everybody died in the soup kitchen, figure out what happened there.
I actually helped you homebrew that one.
Oh, you did? Yes.
Yeah. So I was in the chat with him and he was asking me questions. I was answering him and we basically helped build this whole thing like one night when I was hanging out.
By the way, they loved it. They loved it, and we're going to do another one. So sometime this week, sometime this week, probably Wednesday, if we don't have a session, is going to be homebrewing the next one or like working on the next session.
I'll make sure I stop.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
And it's like they're a group of like brand new. Like one of them is a pretty experienced player. The other 4 are like they've never touched D&D before. So they had a blast. We made, by the way, Dustin, we made physical props for a lot of the puzzles and things like that. Yeah, it's actually really cool. Ended up like, I learned how to age paper. At work.
Yeah.
I literally went into our office kitchen, found some Earl Grey tea bags, and took paper and just went and just slapped it with a tea bag for 10 minutes, and it looked awesome. And I was like,
"Don't worry, internet. That has a different meaning."
Yes.
Well, it's interesting.
Bag your paper. That is make sure you know which bag we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though. So you're running homebrews for one shots for new players.
Yep.
It's funny because for me, I would be like the reverse. Like new players, I might be like, "Here's module," just get involved. So, like, what do you think is the difference there? Just being able to cater to their needs, or is it just
Yeah, Dustin, you could answer. You seem like you had something you want to say.
Well, I think a lot of it for that has to do with, you're talking about people who never played before.
Mm-hmm.
So like a module, like whether it's Curse of Strahd, which is one of the more role play, maybe easier ones to get into because everybody understands vampires and Transylvania, basically. Like it's an easy one to relate to, but it's still 10 levels. Like you're talking about getting into something that's 10 levels long. Like a one shot, it's just nice because you can give them a splash experience with a beginning and an end. They get an idea for what a game is and they like it or not. Like
True.
Like with our one shot we did for Zweihander like last week or whatever. Like we played a Zweihander one shot on Grim and Perilous, and you guys, well, Jeff didn't get to, unfortunately, but the guys here at TT2KB got a little taste of what they felt about that system based on a one shot game. Like so, I could see the benefit of doing it that way. I think.
Yeah, I love doing one shots. One shots are great for new players, people who like, and that is interesting when you say like, why not a module? It's already written out for you. Modules, a lot of players don't know whether or not they want to play D&D. They don't know whether this is actually going to be it for them. And I mean, point being, like one of the girls who was playing, she was like, she made a Kenku warlock, and she was just like, at the end of the session, she was like, I had fun, but I don't think I want to be a warlock anymore. And I was like, sweet, for our next session, let's re-roll. Like, don't worry, we'll keep it at the same level that everybody else is. Re-roll it to something else that you want. Like, the goal of this is not to lock you into a character for a 20-something session campaign, but more so just like, do you like D&D?
Right. Yeah.
And then once you've got them hooked and you've done a couple of these and they like it, if they're not attached to the initial characters that they're dealing with and they're like, all right, you know what? Then you're like, hey, bust out a Curse of Strahd book. Be like, let's start level 1. We'll run you through a 10-level Curse of Strahd campaign now. And, then they figure out what you're going to do after the fact.
What do you guys how many characters have you guys made in your campaigns and things like that? Because that's something that I find interesting. In our Dragon Heist campaign, one of our players, Trevor, he brought in a character that he had played in a lot of my one shots. That character was by that time probably like level 4 or 5, but he was just like, I like this character a lot. Let me like bring him back down to level 1 and let's start again.
Well, for us, we have kind of a unique, I suppose, situation, because our homebrew game we're on Chronicle 5 inside of this homebrew world. We've spent 20-some years in the same world. Every time we make new sets of characters for a new adventure, it takes place in the same world as all of our old characters. So our DM, basically, characters you create become kind of property of the DM.
NPCs that you'll see.
And he does things with them, advances their story even beyond what we play them. And then we run into them. Sometimes they're now the quest givers in a way. Like they got the question mark over their head. Like, hey, go do this for me.
Yeah, excellent. That's
so
cool.
It's because it continues to build on that world. Like we don't have maybe as many characters as you would expect for people that have been playing 20 years. But that's because like our last campaign went for 3.5 years. Like, like I played the same character for 3.5 years. Like, it's
we
a long time.
See a character death here and there, but it's kind of rare. With the exception of that one campaign where I crit myself to death. That was fun.
Everyone but me died, pretty much.
Yeah,
a lot of them like went into hiding, and I thought they all died. But
when crit fails get real.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier that like you haven't touched whatever you want to call it, like Monster XP in like quite some time.
Yeah.
What are you guys using for the homebrew stuff? Is it Milestone? Is it just whatever your DM
when
wants?
Our DM tells us, sometimes it feels like Milestone, sometimes we're not fully sure, but
I think we got away from it just because of the imbalance of it. Like, some characters were leveling up faster than others. Some things about the experience system, like you said before, kind of gear you towards certain actions like boiling ant hills and stuff. Avoiding conversation because you'll miss out on experience, that kind of stuff. So like, I think, I don't know, the experience was an interesting concept when we were young because it felt like you're building towards something. But over time,
it felt like your typical video game RPG. Like you play any RPG like fucking Final Fantasy or anything like that. Like you get XP by winning battles, hearing the victory music, and then moving on.
Yeah,
but as you just said, like that teaches weird habits for groups.
Murder hobo.
Yeah, like that's where the term comes from. Absolutely, where somebody walks into a bar and looks around and just like scopes at like, what's the toughest looking dude here, so I can kick the shit out of them. And
You're
get all
probably
the XP
worth 318 experience.
Well, I feel like the original intent behind it was to promote activity.
Yeah.
Like, we're a group of 5 or 6. We're in high school on a Friday night. Do you want to go play D&D with your friends? Or do you want to partake in the 15 other activities you might do on a Friday night when you're in high school? Mm-hmm. Well, if I don't show up, I'm not going to get my XP and I'm going to be a level behind my friends. I guess I better show up. Like, there's a certain amount of, like, wanting to be there. Like, you don't want to fall behind either. So you have to have at least a certain amount of
participation.
Yeah, because, I mean, we're a role-play heavy group. So for us, it was always about story. But I can see for a lot of groups out there, like, just not wanting to fall behind the rest of the group either. Like, if you had a lot of options, like, I could see where it kind of promotes the idea of making sure you show up.
Yeah,
that's where Adventure League kind of is an interesting,
an
interesting part of the whole, like literally official Wizards of the Coast like empire out there. Do you guys have any experience with that, or have you talked to people who have?
I've seen a lot of people
shop, and there's Adventure League games that go on there, but I don't take part in them, so I have no idea what it's actually like.
Yeah, I made one character for Adventure League, and then I played it one session, and then never played again. So I didn't really get to utilize it, but it's an interesting concept, I think, for people that don't have a dedicated gaming group that, you know, you want to pick up and go somewhere. Again, it's another one of those elements which creates this community across, you know, strangers that maybe our group just hasn't had the need for, just because we're always together. But it's a cool concept, but, you know, there's a lot of things that go with that. When you don't have dedication to a group, you're just kind of, like we were talking about before, the looking for group element of World of Warcraft. You know, you just show up, you're like, man, I'm just getting through the dungeon. Give me my experience, my loot. Let's go.
I've walked into a few gaming shops that are either at like the beginning or the end of a session of Adventure League groups, and I can see, as you just said, I can totally see the appeal of you don't have a dedicated group. You can just show up with your character that is Adventure League legal, and you jump into the thing. But I think, like, me and my wife, we talked to this. We were like looking at minis at a game shop, and we were talking about like the Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, and it was just like this really interesting conversation where, like, it almost was like neither group of people really understood the other.
Yeah,
because
different
they
style.
were like, it was totally different. They were talking about, like, all this guy cared about was how min-maxed his character is.
Right.
About how he has the right amount of paladin and the right amount of this, and that he can do this, like, in combat and stuff like that. And we were talking about how we customized this campaign to allow for a fucking Waboogie the turtle to go and find his lost love, this other turtle that's kidnapped by the Xanathar Guild. Right. Like, and he just it just kind of like you say that, and you just like look of just confusion passes over their face. Like, what?
Adventure League is where all those X's and O's people I was talking about are hanging out, while all the role players are on Twitch streaming. You know,
that might be true. I don't know if it's always true, but
I don't think it is either. You can't say anything in broad strokes that big. But I'm just saying, like, that's where a lot of them I think are probably hiding out at, though.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of makes it that I think that's the predominant role that you would find there, just mainly because it's what it's geared towards. It has so many rules associated with it that the fact that it's like you need to have a like an Adventure League legal character, as I said, like, it needs to follow specific things. If it completely eliminates the ability for, like, a DM to come up with fun homebrew items or fun items that you can give your characters. Can't do it. It has to come from that stuff. Like, you can't come into it with anything interesting.
Me and Jeff both have a lot of experience with Vampire Larp for One World by Night. And when we were in One World by Night Vampire Larp, which of course is across the country, maybe even global, I don't know.
Yeah, it was global.
Overseas games. It was global. It was a global game. So, like, and so I understand the appeal to having a character where I can travel 4 states away, find a game, show up, be like, here's my character sheet, get it approved at the ST bench, and then just go role play my character like he traveled somewhere else, right? Like, it's totally cool. But I also remember as a DM, as a storyteller,
nightmare.
And the nightmare of dealing with the org.
Let's write my petition for writing this story arc.
Story, like, you know,
High
I remember
coordinator.
how liberating it was. Like, when we finally got away from Oregon, just became an independent game, and it was like, we can do whatever we want to. Like,
you spend like a month sending things back and forth. Like, okay, you can have this monster, but you can't let it do this. Okay, well, what if I did it this way? Here you go. 2 weeks later, well, you could do that, but you have to have less potence. Like, okay, all right. And they can't have that magic boogaloo stick. You know, like, oh, okay, whatever.
item you picked up in one game, you bring it back home, and your local STs are like,
nope,
you can't bring that into our town. Like, oh, so I don't know. Like, there's a part of me that when I hear Adventure League or Pathfinder Society, where I'm just like, I don't know if I want to go back to that again.
Well, see, that society concept would be more interesting to me, I think, if there was some continuity or consistency, right? Yeah. So, like, if I was going from story to story and it was like, I've already done this mission, so in my world, that's already occurred. What's the next module? Where does it fit into the timeline? That would make more sense to me if it was like, these modules come out in different periods of time. These are the games that are available to those people to run. You're progressing a story. Whereas just dropping in and being like, oh yeah, it's that module again. Let's go. It seems a little weird to me.
I think now Wizards of the Coast is actually doing something similar to that. What you're saying?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So back to where I started. That's where a lot of the initial one shots that I drew from is that everything like Waterdeep Dragon Heist that comes out, everything there will have a accompanying Adventure League associated with it that lives in the same world as Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but doesn't follow a set storyline. Like, it's not locked to the storyline of the big book, but you could still do stuff like jump in and jump out. I ran quite a few of the accompanying Adventure League Curse of Strahd, like Barovia ones. And it's always interesting, whoever they have that write those, I don't remember if it's the DM Guild or if it's like some independent writers. It's actually very interesting because it's literally like the main campaign, the main module is running adjacent, like running in parallel to this Adventure League thing. Like, you're in the same world and you could totally find characters or whoever it is that's in the main campaign, and you could totally just transfer a character to the main Curse of Strahd campaign if you wanted to. However, it is a story adjacent. Like, it's story adjacant to some of the main campaign lines. So it's actually pretty damn interesting. It ran along with like the dragon one, or what is it, the Tiamat, like why am I blanking on the name of it? There's Storm King's Thunder, Curse of Strahd, the elemental, like the Princes of the Apocalypse, and what was it? There's something about with dragons. It was Tiamat doing some bullshit in the world.
It's Rise of Tiamat, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it was a two-parter. Yeah. It was two-parter. There was Rise of Tiamat, and there was the other part.
Court of the Dragon Queen, maybe.
Court of the Dragon Queen. Jay Bruce
exactly.
With, I think.
Court of the Dragon Queen. Exactly. And there was this really cool kind of like Adventure League stuff that went along with it. That just kind of was like, I think it was literally the stuff that was like in the background of the main campaign guide, where it's like there's this like vast story where these heroes are going off and fighting like Tiamat, but you already in that story there's like stuff that's like, oh yeah, by the way, over here in Flan or wherever this place was, Blackrock Flan or whatever the hell, there's shit going down there, but don't worry about it, people are taking care of that, you guys have your mission to go and take care of this. And that's where the Adventure League stuff was like
they Star Wars'd it.
Yeah.
Star Wars, that's what Star Wars has been doing for decades. They Star Wars'd it.
They totally did. Yeah, they fucking Rogue One to that shit. Like, the Adventure League was Rogue One, where they were just like,
did. Yeah,
it's like, by the way, here's a story about how they actually got the, like, you remember how in that campaign you got the sick-ass item that these dudes just randomly gave you that said some adventurers died for it? There you go. That's right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what they did. The guy who randomly walks through the screen in episode 5 in some spot gets, like, a whole book written about him later. Like, it's basically like...
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting concept. So
they do accompany, it's all the Adventure League stuff now, at least, does if it's official by Wizards of the Coast, it's usually a accompanying whatever the current module is. So when Descent into Avernus comes out in September, which I'm really interested in seeing, there will be an Adventure League associated with it.
That's fantastic. So now, do you run many of those games, or you just have participated in them once in a while, or?
I've just participated in them once in a while. I like take trips to local game stores to check out. I was into Magic the Gathering for like a hot minute, and I would encounter on some Saturdays or Sundays the D&D leagues that would be there. But as kind of like to your point, the most of them that I encountered wasn't really Adventure League stuff, but more of the like local campaign. Let's use this local game shop as our hub and meet up here. And it didn't sound like any of the like official stuff. They're probably.
I do that. I run a game at the game shop every other Sunday. So yeah, and it happens right after the Adventure League game ends. So I usually get to catch the end of the Adventure League game while I'm waiting for them to clear the table so I can set up. So that's been my experience with Adventure League.
Do you get any bleed over from that of like folks that are just like, I'm done with Adventure League. Let me just jump in whatever this game is.
I've got 3 players from that Adventure League game that play in my game now.
Interesting. And is the one that you run, is it homebrew? Is it?
Oh yeah, it's all my homebrew stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
And the players have no clue. They were not prepared for me.
So I have a question for you guys in terms of like the homebrewing stuff, because as you already said, like you've looked at Tomb of Annihilation as a module. You've seen the modules and you understand what they are. How much of your homebrew lives in the 5e like universe or by that 5e rule set? What is your like your thing, whatever you want to call it, the barometer lie?
We're definitely in the rule set. How much it lives in the 5e universe? I don't know, 0%. Like, World is its own world. Like, it doesn't cross over with any of the other worlds or anything. Like, it's its own world.
Yeah, totally. So, but I guess like you go by 5e rules. Like, if you're like, I'm making a character, I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna go by the like PHB for a paladin and a half elf paladin is gonna be this. But you're not in Faerun. Like, you're not visiting Waterdeep. You're not visiting Baldur's Gate. You're not visiting. None of those things. Okay.
Not even name drops. Nope.
So what steers you away from that? Is it that you just once again harkening back to what you said about where you guys kind of originated from, but
I think it's in the same way you hear people talk about, like we were just mentioning, like Star Wars. Mm-hmm. How like you can't write a story about Star Wars without having to honor 45 years of canon.
Right.
I don't think our DM, Levi, who runs these games in this one world that we're referencing here, wants to be tied down to any knowledge from any other books that have been written by not him. So like he could take us to Waterdeep. I mean, you could open a portal at any time and drop us anywhere he wanted to. He literally dropped us onto an island. We have no clue where we're at. It could be in any of those worlds. It's not. He's already made sure we are aware it's not, but it could be. But for him to take us into Waterdeep, now he has to honor what Waterdeep is. He has to honor the guilds that are there that are established by essentially canon. Whereas he would rather create his own canon. He'd rather make a new city that he has 100% control over that nobody can tell him he's wrong about and just do it instead of having to honor anything else.
Yeah, and that's super interesting because in my eyes, I don't see that as canon, and I think that's where, like, maybe it's based off of what I was brought into this with. I don't have that like extensive, starting in 2nd edition, starting in AD&D history with D&D. I understand the legacy of it. I understand the history of what this means, but then at the same time, like, I fucking ripped up Waterdeep. I took it as like, all right, this is a cool ass city, but let's have some fun. And I didn't feel bad, I guess. And there's nothing. I mean, I totally understand where it's like, yeah,
you totally shouldn't.
Like, I totally like feel like you can just go in there and just like there are the two sides. I totally understand the honoring of if that's what you're into, honoring what like Gary Gygax or whoever it was that wrote the lore of Waterdeep in this edition. Following that to a T. There was a group of people who were doing Waterdeep Dragon Heist where we were attempting to do this living city of Waterdeep, where we were realizing like, well, what if a character wanted to know what bar was on this corner? There's people who were diving into the history of like, what was Waterdeep like in 2nd edition? What was it like in 3rd edition? Let's find all those bars, all those taverns, all these establishments, fest halls, and all that stuff. And we started populating a big map of the city so that if somebody wanted to be as faithful as they could be with Waterdeep, hell yeah, they could be. And then we got DMCA'd by Wizards of the Coast and told to take the thing down.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, it is. It's that way though. Where like it is a lot like we joking like talking about like Star Wars, right? Like you could say something and there's always that guy, right, who's going to be like, but that's not what this guy would have done because in this comic book that's canon, I did this. Like, you could do that with if you're dealing with these established worlds that have had umpteen number of novels about Dris Jordan and all these other people written about him. And
I think that's where my group, I'm lucky, or the group that I have is not new to D&D, but they don't know anything about like all the past history, so they're totally fine with, I guess, me homebrew. It's like this. It's an interesting middle ground that I live in right now, because I'm not homebrewing in terms of creating my own. Like I'm like, fuck it. I'm in Faerun. I'm in 100% in Faerun for this entire campaign, and everybody knows it. But at the same time, they also totally understand that, like, we created fiction and like events and things that are 100% not canon to what would happen. I mean, like, I'll wave to the audience now and say spoilers for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Do not listen.
I knew we were
going to
hit
spoilers.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
Spoiler alert! My group, we ran Autumn in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. And if those who have looked at the modules or looked at the book at all, there's 4 seasons that you can run. Obviously, winter, spring, summer, autumn, and each of them has a different villain associated with it. And it's really cool because, once again, I could run this book 3 more times with 3 different more seasons, and it would have a completely different outcome for whatever the characters were wanted to do. And actually, it would have a really big different outcome for what my characters chose. We ended up running Autumn, and the villain was Jarl Axel, who is this enigmatic, charismatic drow leader of the Brigandarth, which is an interesting concept. They are a male supremacy drow group.
Random. Yeah, that's not what you normally would look for. The old drow kingdoms.
For people who maybe don't understand the actual drow lore, they're ran by the females of their species.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So it's this very interesting thing where he left the Underdark, created this group of basically escaped male drows who were disenfranchised or disillusioned with the way that drow society worked, and he created this kind of literally like drow mafia on the surface. And so he's the villain of my group, or for my group. And the interesting thing is that throughout the story, you're looking for the horde of dragons, or the dragon heist. You're looking for this cache of coins that is underneath the city of Waterdeep that a former leader of Waterdeep hid there. You learned that it was embezzled, like he stole it. It's bad. He was a bad dude. Neverember, the current like ruler of Neverwinter, is the guy who left Waterdeep, hid his coins there, and now is up in Neverwinter, like fucking off up there doing some weird shit. So the villain that I chose with Jarl Axel, his whole goal was ambiguous. He wanted to find the Horde in order to literally buy his way into the Lord's Alliance, this like group of like Sword Coast, the Sword Coast kind of like leaders, all these cities on the Sword Coast. He wanted to buy his way in because he is the shadow leader of a city up on the coast called Luskan. And they have a bad reputation. They got a bad draw. They're this like pirate city, so everybody kind of sees them as the Tortuga like of the world. Nobody wants them in the Lord's Alliance. But he, with that huge cache of money, is literally going to be like, look, I brought back all the gold that was embezzled and stolen from Waterdeep. Let me into the Lord's Alliance. My group ended up siding with Jarl Axel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They ended up, he paid them. And once again, the whole thing of using it as a sandbox, by the book, there's probably very little way that they should have sided with him. But I looked at his backstory, I looked at the way it was written, and I realized he is I wouldn't say evil character. He has, if allowed to explain his reasoning of why he wants the gold or why he wants to steal this money, people would be like, if nobody in the group was lawful, they would be like, yeah, totally. I get it. You've got a bum. You've had a bum rap for your city. Like, you have no protection. The Lord's Alliance provides protection for those in the Alliance. Like, I got it. That makes sense. Yeah. And once my Jarl Axel paid them a visit in their inn, wasn't written in the book. I decided it was a interesting thing to do. have a climactic moment where he shows up, just walks into their inn with his like cadre of bodyguards and just has a sit down conversation with them, like Al Capone style, of just being like, look, you guys have been a huge headache for me this entire time. I could kill you right now. What are your options? Like, I won't kill you here. I'll probably kill you in the street later, but like, what are you guys gonna do about this? I offer you. And then he offers them. And this was actually written in the module where it says, if they could totally decide to side with them, he would offer them like a percentage of the gold. My group got 25,000 gold from this. He offered them 25,000. And then of course he offered them an additional 25 if they were there was like apparently a staff of some sort in the vault. If they could bring the staff back, an additional 25,000. They later found out the staff was in the possession of a adult gold dragon, which was probably not the
for people at level 5.
Yeah.
Remember, you're level 5 at this point.
An adult, you say?
Yeah. Oh, and then the best part too was that they learned, or they knew that he wanted that thing, and there was literally a split-second decision that my group made that they said, we're going to tell this dragon, now that he is no longer in charge of guarding the gold here in this vault, totally go and check out and go and visit this person and leave the city. Because they kind of got an inkling that they're like, Jarl Axel is not the most virtuous type. He's going to get that staff no matter what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave them the kind of like, their characters didn't see it, but you as a group got to see it, epilogue of Jarl Axel being extremely angry when he finds out that the dragon has left town, or like the dragon is no longer there with the staff that he really, really wanted, which was a staff that kept dragons from entering Waterdeep.
Uh-huh.
So the holder of the staff could literally hold the city ransom if he wanted to. Like he could look, go out and find any sort of like ancient, whatever color dragon you want, pick your color, and allow them to enter the city and do whatever they want because he holds the power to keep them out. It was really interesting that they made that split-second decision to evacuate this person, and it kind of was like
just blew up the game. Yeah.
It blew it up, but at the same time,
in a cool way. Yeah.
Jarl Axel didn't know.
and that really is the one thing about these modules, the way 5th Ed modules are put together, is that I've watched you do your dragon heist. I caught the end of it. I didn't obviously catch all 72 sessions. I caught like the last third of it, I think, when I started watching. And then like I watched like the people over at like Dadbot D&D running Dragon Heist. Yeah. It's a completely different game. It's like a really different experience. Like it's so funny. Like you see all these people do the same module, but it plays so differently from just because of the way that DMs are willing to get in there and tear it apart and let their players just live in these worlds to a degree. Like it's far more homebrew than what I expected when I started watching streams that had module play on it. It was not what I anticipated at all.
Well, I think that takes a kind of an advanced dungeon master, right? Because being able to play with your game, it gives you a freedom, where you're not stuck reading flavor text and hoping that you got something right that is coming up later in the sessions. But it does take a seasoned veteran, I think, to actually piece everything together and to allow freedom in a way that doesn't end up breaking the game, and knowing how to recover and how to manage randomness, I guess, that the players are going to throw your way.
100%. There is the number one thing I have to deal with is that balance of letting my players expand out and have them have free reign in this sandbox of a city that they were in, while then bringing them back in and being like, by the way, here's that thread of a plot that you're meant to be chasing. I guess it was basically, if you don't bring them back in with like physical consequences, as Gastroy says, who is one of my players,
nice leash.
They need a leash.
It's not, but it's not like one of those like smack and like pull them back in like really hard and just be like, this is a jarring thing. But it's mainly just kind of like, okay, allow them to expand, allow them to explore more, allow them to build up their world as well. Because it's not just my game. It's not just my game as the DM. That's the number one thing. I'm building this world with them. Let them contribute. Let people add whatever they're interested in. Have them, if they're interested in, like, I'll use Destroy, who's here. His character had this whole backstory of he is carrying the phylactery of Zengi, the Witch King, from his ancient icy kingdom that he once lived in as an Eladrin elf. And there was multiple times throughout our campaign where we took these little side missions to be like, research more about your patron, Hexblade Warlock. Research more about your patron. Let's figure out a way to allow this phylactery, which is a gem embedded in your arm, to kind of evolve or like get bigger or something like that. We had a moment where he literally found a tome about his patron's past, and that shop ceased to exist when he went back to try to find it again. Just because that was an interesting moment of like, it turned into an alleyway, like a vacant alleyway, but it was like a book-filled shop when he visited it the first time.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's
and even Destroy, once again, using my buddy here as an example, we did a homebrew campaign with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's even voiced this before as well, where we started this homebrew campaign of a kind of like Arcano-punk style thing. And it was an interesting world. But then he found that for him, it was tough to really kind of plan that far forward and do as much prep as he wanted to do in order to have it be fleshed out. And now with him running Storm King's Thunder for us,
mm-hmm.
it's following like the examples of having, like, he's thrown in a bunch of homebrew, his own like examples of like weird shit, and he's taken the cues like this doesn't make sense in the module for the group, so let's move this thing over here. Or like this town has no examples of bars and fest halls and stuff like that, so let's just throw something in here and let me just make up a new character and throw it at you guys. It's a much better, like, as he said, it's like he's feeling the whole thing where like these modules, they're great for the sandbox aspect of it.
Huh.
It's really,
it gives you the walls of the sandbox, and it gives you the sand.
Yeah.
And then you go in and you get to play in it. Whereas if you're homebrewing, you have to build your sandbox before you can play in it. So it's, how much sandbox time do you want to spend building the frame and hauling the sand in? It's
absolutely. And I'm sure, like, your DM, how long do you know how long he's been like behind the helm of DMing campaigns and things like that?
Our entire career.
In high school.
25 years.
Yeah, a long time.
What did he like? What was his start? Do you remember if he just homebrewed?
We had him on as a guest a few weeks back, so he did kind of tell us how he got started with a theater group.
Yeah,
where they were like playing between scenes where there was no dice. It was just, I don't even know if they had sheets. I'm trying to recall exactly how he tells the story. It doesn't look like he's in chat anymore. He must have had to go to bed. But he would talk about how like they would basically just like, okay, this is what my character does, and the DM would just be like, okay, you did it. Like there was no dice rolls even. Like that's how minimal it was that he started in. So he's always been kind of in that world.
Yeah, but we even started, I think, after that point, straight into homebrew. Like I think he played like a couple sessions of something. Like so I think we've all played like a session or two of a module, and we tasted it and went, yeah.
Well, we didn't module, but we had people who bought the campaign books, like the setting books. Like our friend Joe bought the Forgotten Realms book.
Yeah.
And one of our largest campaigns that went on for a few years was in Forgotten Realms. And another one of my friends, he read all the novels from Dragonlance. And so we played in a game that was in Dragonlance. Mm-hmm. We never played an actual module. It was still, to a degree, homebrewed adventures that took place in Faerun, that took place in Ravenloft. But they were never... Mm-hmm. We encountered Strahd, but there was no Curse of Strahd module to run through at the time. So we, like, when I see Curse of Strahd, I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember a lot of those things still being around there, but it isn't the same experience I had because those modules didn't exist then. So
yeah, I think for us, like, our experience with the modules, because as I played a few, but we played with people who are very much, I'm going to read the script. If you start deviating from the script, I'm going to get confused and not know what's going on. I described that rock as black. It's actually red. Like the whole game unravels. You can't go to that room because, I don't have the page for it. So, so like these things really, we bucked against, I guess. that looseness is being able to improvise, I think, which you're describing being able to do all the time. But I think when we were first looking at these books, we're like, if you improvise at this point when we're not seasoned, things are going to go off the rails and not recover.
Yep. That's, I think, the number one worry for people when they see these modules and they want to run them is that they kind of get bunched up, or they get worried about the improvisation of it. And it is, it's 100% a loose guide, as Gashroy just said. It's a guide more than a rigid exact campaign. And I think people tend to want there's certain groups that want to run it that way, and that's fine. If that's your bag, you can totally run it as a rigid campaign. And then that's actually where, interestingly, a lot of people, like with Tomb of Annihilation, there was a bunch of people that hated the module because they were like, rules is written, this module is garbage. And I was just like, okay. There is that foreword at the beginning of the book that says this is a campaign setting. You're more than welcome to use it what pieces you want. And they're like, the whole travel thing, my group just completely didn't like it because you had to roll for every day of travel. And I'm like, well, I dropped that halfway through the campaign when my group just kind of was like at the point where it just didn't really make sense for us to start rolling the travels per day thing anymore. And that I just kind of montaged Jungle Book through the jungle to the next destination where we got to an interesting point. Why didn't you do that? And they're like, well, his rules is written. I'm like, all right, fine. Like, if that's the way you want to see the book, then that's the way that you'll play it, and that's fine. But
it's a different era. Like, I think we touched on this earlier a little bit, but if you think back to the 80s and the 90s, and for some people the 70s, examples of games were very scripted. If you had a fantasy setting, it was a specific canon story that went from point A to point B in a linear fashion. This is what happens. When you looked at the video games that are around, you're on rails because that's the structure of the game. Like, you didn't have the memory to run a very complex open world game. Whereas in today's age, everything's a freaking open world. Choose your own adventure story. Making your choice of good, evil, whatever, playing in MMOs where you're playing with groups. So, like, I think the guideline that people have, like that kind of default style in their mind, is different nowadays than it was back then.
Yeah. Per age base, per player base, wherever you got started, it's where your mindset is, for sure.
Yeah. And I think the only argument you can make for rules is written on some of those things is if you have a player with a player class that has some sort of class ability that would shine during that part. Like, if you have a ranger, a druid, where overland travel becomes like his thing, where you're taking away his opportunity to shine, or you have if you're working it around that sort of a deal, I could see where it'd be like, you need the ranger and the druid. This is the part that makes them awesome. Like, you don't want to deny them their chance to use what's on their sheet, I guess. But that would be the only other reason I could see for sticking to something, even if it seemed like maybe not the most entertaining way of going about it.
Right. And I'm trying to think back, like in the old school books, I don't remember there being sections saying play it as you want or edit these things how you would do it. It was here's the book. I
feel like it was always in every book. I think the difference is they moved it to the front of the book instead of the back of the book. I always felt like at the end of the old books, it was like, now remember, you can do what you kind of want to in these worlds because it's awesome. Like, but now I feel like it's like
if I still had my old books, I would look it up, but I sold those.
I can read this right now because it actually is pretty cool. So it's like, here's the foreword for like the Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It says, a simple question began rattling around my head over 2 years ago as I was bidding farewell to Barovia, dragging myself out of the depths of Maelstrom and planning a year-long expedition to Chol. Where do we go next? After mulling over several options, we decided it would be refreshing to return to civilization. Waterdeep Dragon Heist is a treasure hunt with an urban backdrop. We've visited Waterdeep before, but not like this. Clever heroes will respect the city's rules. Those who get in the city's bad side are in for a rough time, as the City of Splendors is home to some of the most powerful figures of the Forgotten Realms. Charlie Sanders, a lifelong D&D player, brought his experience writing for television to the project to help flesh out the story Bible from months before work on the adventure was scheduled to begin. Matthew Mercer, whom you might know from the live stream show Critical Role, lent us his boundless imagination and helped flesh out some of the villains. A D&D adventure is only as good as its villains, and Waterdeep Dragon Heist has multiple baddies to choose from. Before I pull back the curtain and lead you into the heart of Waterdeep, I wish to thank Ed Greenwood for making the City of Splendors what it is. Kind of magical place you wish in your heart was real. It's just kind of like it kind of lays it out as being like it is what it is. Like yeah, it's not a just kind of as like here's a great sandbox. It's cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference now with when you take something where you have so many people streaming. I think if you're streaming, you live in a little different world because
For sure. Yeah.
your viewers have a different expectation going in, perhaps, or people that are checking out things like that. Like, I think maybe with some of the older books where it wasn't as emphasized so heavily it was kind of known that you were taking the book back home to your group and that you and your group were going to do whatever the hell you wanted to with it. And there was nobody there to tell you were right, wrong, or otherwise. You know, what happened at our game table in Ravenloft was literally the canon for us. And no one else ever knew it existed. No one was there to tell us what the mist did when you walked into it. You know, it may have been a blurb in a book somewhere, and Bryce may have seen it at one point or not. Who knows? He did what he wanted to do at the time with it, and none of us could tell him otherwise. Like,
Right.
So, you know, I think maybe it was just more a given back then that you were going to do things your own way. Whereas now with Adventure League and with other things, I think maybe there's more of this kind of, like I said with Star Wars, kind of this idea that there is like a canon with novels and everything else that have been done since then. So,
I think when you have an Adventure League, I think that is definitely the case. Because in theory, you're running something in a universe with other people. You know, so that consistency may be important.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, if you're just running the module for yourself and your group, who cares? You know?
Right. Yeah, as Juice was saying there, he sees a decent amount of backseating in streams.
Oh,
if you go hop around the streams, you can see it from time to time. Like, that's not what Xanathar would say.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you'll see those people speak up every now and then. Like, that's not what happened in our game.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, too, though, to talk about that, where, like, D&D being streamed so much now, there is, as you said, people saying, like, that's not what happened in our game. And then there's this weird thing where, like, they released the the guide, like Tal'Dorei guide or Tal'Dorei setting guide for the Critical Role campaign 1.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned earlier the Matt Mercer effect, and that is it's a good and a bad thing. And I hate harking on it as a bad thing because I love all the good that's coming out of it. Where it's really popularized D&D. More and more people are like interested in and getting into it. But then there is that side of where like I always worry about somebody who would buy the Tal'Dorei campaign guide because they heard about it from Critical Role.
Yeah.
And so they're like,
expect
there's
somebody else to run it that way. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There's multiple people who have said or I've seen experiences where they're like, as a DM, my group disbanded or my group just broke apart because we were running a Tal'Dorei campaign and players were like, well, that's not how dwarves talk. Or that's not, that's a Dragonborn is supposed to act this way. Or I talked to my wife about this. I'm like, I always worry about people who buy that and then use the campaign setting as almost like a tourist guide or a tourism guide of being like,
I'm in the same world. Yeah, let's go hang out with the characters.
Yeah. And so I think that's where like some of where like homebrewing comes into play, where like I love to homebrew so I can make something my own, because I think there are people who would be like even diehard fanatics of like the Faerun or the Faerun universe, right? Where they're like, I'm going to go take a trip to Waterdeep and go see this person because I've read about it in a book. But I think that's less common now because I don't think as many people have read, the crazy amount of backstories of Faerun that they have before.
Yeah,
but I feel like that
actually
jump. Yeah, I feel like that would actually be a thing if more settings came out, like if they made more modern settings of Planescape, or as you said, there's like, and you mentioned Discworld before as well. I know that's not a official that's not a Wizards of the Coast like D&D setting, but like major fans of those fictional universes, if there was ever a setting with those, I feel like it would have the same effect where like people would run in there and want to be like, I want to go find Percy. I want to go see Keyleth. I want to go find Grog. and then you run into these really awkward situations where a DM has to be fucking perfect in order to have those expectations. And so I always worry about those setting guides. That's my biggest worry about it.
I think that's why we got into homebrewing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's why our DM created Limworld, was because he took a lot of our early characters that were from these Ravenloft games and from Faerun games that we were running, and was just like, I don't want to have to own everything that was done. I want to do my own. And he literally ripped us from those worlds, put us into his, and we've been adventuring in there ever since. So
I think the Matt Mercer effect is an interesting one too. I wish we weren't calling it that, because it kind of places a lot on him.
He's such a great guy, and he is. For like inspiration for DM stuff, obviously I like everybody using Matt Mercer for inspiration for things like, I love how he plays off the characters. He's a great example of I think of where I would get inspiration for using a module, but then allowing the module to grow around your characters or grow around your players, which he does very well. Like he is that one of the epitomes of like, because his catchphrase is "you can always try."
Right. Yeah.
Like that. I mean, besides, how do you want to do this? That's the other one. But like, you can always try is a perfect example of when you're in a campaign with quote unquote constrained settings and somebody wants to do something that's not written in the books. Like, you can always try. Let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also where like I use Adam Coble as inspiration as well, because he does a lot of very like, he allows players to really he allows them to kind of fulfill their goals or search things out within their setting. He does his own homebrew stuff while using 5e rules, but a lot of it does kind of give me ideas for that, like what ends up being homebrewy for current settings. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, really that the effect is more of like people worrying about not being professional DMs, right? So you're getting into your first game and somebody's trying to run a game for the first time, and they're like, oh, I watched Critical Role and I'm interested in gaming, so it's going to be that, right? And for our group, we're really big on roleplay and in character and backstories and stuff, but lots of groups don't do any of that stuff. And so it almost kind of sets up this dynamic of this is what Dungeons and Dragons is the Critical Role style. And I think that's where people are getting really tripped up on it.
Yeah.
But
well, you go into a table and you expect that you're going to have the same rapport or being able to talk back and forth as people who have known each other. Like, you guys have played for 25 years and you probably have that ability to riff off each other. I am very proud of our group as well, where even playing for 3 years, we have the comfort of being able to just like, gosh, in our Storm King's Thunder campaign, we played a previous Friday where I didn't have work the next day. We had a couple beers in, and we just fucking went nuts in terms of like bouncing off each other. I don't think we made progress for a solid like 30 minutes where we were just in a bar that Destroy made up, just like dicking around with different characters for the entire time. It was awesome.
Those are great sessions. If people are having fun, you're doing it right.
Yeah, we were just laughing, making up the wonderful bard Jamuel Sampson, who was a famous bard in the city of Waterdeep. That of course he has to be there, along with Forgan Meeman. He was the other one that was part of that society of bards. Like, just like being able to riff off each other like that, and it's not. People come to a table fresh and they expect that they're going to have that immediately you're going to have the Laura Bailey, like Liam O'Brien interactions that were like emotionally charged and like they're fucking they're actors. They're actors. You can't expect that. It's crazy.
Well, speaking of being able to riff on and on and on and having a great time, we have done an excellent job of it. We're coming in on that 2-hour mark. So this is typically where we have to start winding down, even though the conversation could definitely keep going. Like, it's been a good one. So let's, I guess, start doing our outros here a little bit, unless you guys have anything else you need to slip in there. Yeah.
I would say go and check out Waterdeep Dragon Heist. If I was to advertise for any of the Wizards of the Coast modules, Waterdeep Dragon Heist I think was the most fun our group had in a setting. It was a great balance of like Tomb of Annihilation had that great kind of like open world thing, but then at the same time it was pretty deadly in the end, and had that kind of cool tomb setting, but Waterdeep Dragon Heist, it felt really interesting to be alive, to have these characters be live in this city, like what felt like a sandbox city, and really having this really interesting, almost Ocean's 11's style chase. And as Gastroid just said, there was a great balance in Waterdeep Dragon Heist for roleplay, and then some really interesting combat settings as well. Like, you could throw in street fights, you could throw in like random encounters in the city. You had so much to really work with and play with. And it was a very nice and balanced thing. So if at the end of this we're talking about modules from Wizards of the Coast that are really good to kind of riff off of and use as examples to sandbox in, go with Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It's one of the most recent ones that just has that really fun potential.
It really is.
It's
It
awesome.
really is written from a standpoint of being able to really free form what your story is going to be. Like,
Yeah.
I think versus like I said, I really enjoy what they did with Curse of Strahd, but I totally see your point of how it's more on rails than what Waterdeep is for sure. And Barovia is just that way in general. You can't leave Barovia if you try.
You can't go anywhere.
You're on the rails. There's you can't leave the sandbox. Sorry, you're in.
Yeah. True story.
You feel the characters in Barovia feel forced to chase down Strahd in the campaign. In Waterdeep, they want to finish the campaign. I think that's the number one difference, is that it's not just like, oh God, we got to escape. And it's like, you know what? Somebody threatened our establishment that we've been given. Like, they tried to blow it up with a fireball. We're invested in this. The characters have a reason to fight.
It really is
compelling.
interesting how that bit of player property changes that whole
Very
changes
cool.
that whole module. And we actually talked with Bob from Dadbot D&D about that about a month or so ago when he was on here, because he's running Waterdeep, and we had a whole session where we talked about just player property and how you use that. And Waterdeep is a great example.
Absolutely.
How you go about that.
Yeah, so that's my recommendation.
I'll definitely look
Play
into
Waterdeep
it.
Dragon Heist.
Once
I'll
again, why don't
suggest
you
it.
tell them real quick, Scuzz, where they can find you, like times and
Yeah.
channels.
Okay. So once again, twitch.tv/Skuzznuggit. We play D&D on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Right now, the campaigns are Dungeon the Mad Mage, which is a pretty grindy. It's a little bit grindy, and it's underground dungeon crawly, but we're making it in my style, working with trying to make it a little bit more role play, a little bit more free form within the constraints. It's quite fun. It's a nice challenge. We also play on Thursdays. Currently, that is a Storm King's Thunder campaign run by Gastroy. Same group of players in a different setting and different characters. I'm having fun with it because I get to play Plung, a ancestral guardian barbarian
Nice.
who was graciously gifted a set of gauntlets that allow me to wrestle gargantuan or large creatures. So we've had some great examples of Plung the Goblin wrestling giants. And I have not built him optimally. I've taken Tavern Brawler and some other one that allows me to just basically like grapple targets as a bonus action. So I'm a goblin wrestling giants, and I love it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, for huge creatures. Otherwise, I'm streaming randomly on the rest of the nights, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Wednesday, and sometimes Friday, doing DM prep, as Dustin has seen me do for some of the campaigns. I'm going to be doing DM prep this week for our session that we'll probably be doing on Friday. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Skuzznuggit and on Instagram at Skuzznuggit. And this is Loki. She is a little bit of a demon, but she's a cute cat. She likes to eat everything on that shelf behind me.
Awesome. Views just went up 20%.
Nice.
Well, Dustin, what are you up to these days?
All right. Well, most of the time you find me here on TT2KB, where we are, of course, playing in our Everstorm game, 5e homebrew adventure on Saturdays. Not every Saturday, unfortunately. Like we mentioned, we only get to do a couple Saturdays a month. Next game is in a couple of weeks. I won't be in that one again, unfortunately, because I'll be on vacation at Disney World with my kids and family. So that'll be
Don't worry,
a lot of fun.
we'll TPK
Hanging
while
out in
you're
Star
gone.
Wars land, drinking the blue milk. It's gonna be great.
Nice.
But I won't be there for that game session. But you also find me here on the Wisdom Check every Monday, where we have another guest. Next week, it's Turkey Terror from the Grouch Couch. The Drunks and Dragons will be here. If you haven't checked those guys out, you should. They just finished season 1 campaign. They had a one shot this week as a down off week, and then next week I believe they start new new campaign. They're 100% homebrew too. They play 5e rules, but their whole campaign is homebrewed as well. And they do a lot of drinking on stream, and there's hilarity ensues.
It's
In
gonna be
costume,
great.
the whole thing green screen. It's hilarious. But,
Nice.
so they'll be on next week, where I'll talk a lot about stuff that they're going to be doing. So
Awesome.
you also find me occasionally at Plague State, where I play MMOs. But right now, actually, a guildmate of mine is actually streaming on Plague State. So if you go there, you'll actually watch him. Re-downloaded SOTOR today, and I'm going to be playing.
Oh, wow.
with that.
Reaching
So-
back in the Wayback
We
Machine.
Well, we have to, because God, don't get me started on this fucking rant. But MMO rant today, but we'll save it for another time.
Yeah, we'll do another time. Yeah, so for my own stuff, obviously I'm playing that same 5e game with Dustin, and you'll see us here soon. And obviously we do the wisdom check together, so we're in that together. I also have a YouTube channel where I do some Let's Play content. I'm taking a bit of a break right now, but there's plenty of videos on there if you want to watch it. So that's Reign Survives. That's REIGN Survives. So check that out. Also, we have a pretty amazing guest coming up soon. So I'm still trying to get the date pegged down. But next month, we're having Larry Elmore on. So if you don't know who that is, go look it up. He is the artist who did all of the old school Dungeons & Dragons art that got the whole thing started. He is a legendary artist, and it's going to be a fantastic thing. I'm really excited about that one. So be looking forward to that. And with that, I think we're pretty much good to go at this point. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here as a guest.
Yeah,
and
thank you for having me on.
yeah, we'll definitely have to do this again in the future. So thanks for riding with us, folks, and we'll see you next Monday.
Peace.